I've got something to share with you that I think is both really interesting and quite hopeful. We talk a lot about how divided Americans are, and on some things we truly are divided. But I've always contended that we have a lot of areas of commonality that we aren't even really aware of, and it turns out that climate change is one of them. So there's an organization I love. It's called the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, and they just today released a new report which is based on a survey they conducted of American voters in December after the presidential elections, and the results are fascinating. They teach us something that I think will make you feel better about Americans as a whole. So let me give you the top lines first. They are that most registered voters support climate-friendly policies, think the United States should use more renewables and less fossil fuels in the future, and support U.S. participation in the Paris Climate Agreement. Amazing, right? Let's dig down into the details just a bit. Like, when we say most registered voters support climate-friendly policies, what kind of policies are we talking about there? And what do we mean when we say most? Well, for example, 88% of registered voters support providing federal funding to help farmers improve practices to protect and restore the soil so it absorbs and stores more carbon. That includes 96% of liberal Democrats, but also 78% of conservative Republicans. 77% of registered voters, including 62% of liberal and moderate Republicans, support funding more research into renewable energy sources like solar and wind power. 74% of registered voters support setting strict limits on methane emissions from oil and gas productions. Hey, Joe Biden did that. 73% of registered voters support regulating carbon dioxide, the primary greenhouse gas, as a pollutant. 69% of registered voters support providing tax credits or rebates to encourage people to buy electric appliances like heat pumps and induction stoves that run on electricity instead of oil and gas. That's exactly what President Biden was doing in the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, all you Project 2025 people better plug your ears for this one, because it turns out that 69% of registered voters support funding more research on global warming and climate change by federal agencies such as NASA, NOAA, and the EPA. All agencies, of course, that the Trump administration is promising to either drastically defund or cut completely. And there's lots more like this because, again, most registered voters support climate-friendly policies. Now, you may say, well, then why didn't they like President Biden? Wasn't his entire Inflation Reduction Act just filled with those policies? And yes, it was, but unfortunately, most registered voters heard almost nothing about it. And that is something I will be frustrated about till my dying day. After reading a brief description of what was in that bill, though, 70% of registered voters say they support it. Of course, repealing that bill is one of Donald Trump's top priorities. More evidence that he doesn't care what voters want. That is further evidenced by the fact that Donald Trump withdrew us from the Paris Climate Agreement, even though 73% of American voters wanted us to stay in, including 2 out of 3 liberal and moderate Republicans, and even 4 in 10 conservative Republicans. In fact, of course, Donald Trump opposes every single one of the popular policies we just talked about. But that doesn't mean that the American people don't want climate action, because they do. So remember that next time you don't feel hope. The will is there. We just have to remember what we're up against, which is big oil spending hundreds of millions of dollars to line Republicans and especially Donald Trump's pockets to make sure that they go in this direction rather than the one we all want. Donald Trump's constituents are the fossil fuel industry. Everything he does proves it. But never forget, if he worked for us and not for them, we'd be moving in an entirely cleaner direction.